If you've ever felt like energy listens to you, like the world responds when you think, feel, or intend, you're not imagining it. Centuries ago, one man wrote a manual exposing the hidden forces behind nature, mind, and influence. They tried to bury it, but today we're opening it. Imagine the sky before we had names for it. No telescopes, no equations, no maps drawn in ink, only fire against the black. One night, a light moves where no light should. A white streak splits the stars. It doesn't blink, it burns. You don't know what it is, only that it wasn't there yesterday, and now it is. You feel it before you understand it. A warning maybe, or a message. Your breath catches, your heart remembers. Something older than language. They called it an omen. The gods were angry. The spirits stirring. A war approaching. Halley's comet came, and sickness followed. Empires collapsed. Babies were born too early. Someone whispered that the sky had opened. But look again, not with fear, with stillness. That same comet returns like clockwork now. Not chaos, not wrath, but orbit. Icy stone pulled along a path older than cities. We name it, we track it, we plot its next arrival like a tide chart. And the fear it once stirred, that was never magic. It was recognition. We just didn't have the words for it yet. So much of what was once feared as supernatural was simply law misunderstood. St. Elmo's fire blue light clinging to the sails of ships, glowing through storms. Sailors fell to their knees, sure they had entered some holy presence or summoned a curse. But it was only the air itself, charged, ionized, releasing light through plasma as storms charged the sky. Not a spirit, not a witch, just a field meeting a threshold. Physics in the language of today, wonder in the language of then, and even that is too neat, because it was holy, wasn't it? It moved people, it shook something inside them. What we call a discharge now was once called visitation. We were never wrong to feel awe, we were only quick to misname it. Cardano knew this. He saw what others feared and called it natural, not to diminish its power, but to honor its structure. He didn't need demons to explain thunder. He didn't need curses to explain illness. He looked for the laws under the pattern, and what he found was not myth, but memory. The body remembering that it belongs to something wider. There was a time when earthquakes meant punishment. Volcanoes were mouths of gods. Lightning was Zeus casting judgment. But now fault lines shift under pressure. Magma obeys the heat trapped below. Lightning finds the tallest point and completes a circuit. These are not miracles, not fantasies. They are motions. Predictable, real, just once hidden. The same goes for the illusions that once broke our trust in our own eyes. A shimmering oasis on a desert horizon. Not magic, not madness, just light bending through heat. A face in the smoke, a message in the shadow, not lies, but tricks of the angle. All lawful, all explainable, but not less mysterious for it. Because even when we understand it, the feeling doesn't leave. The old awe still hums beneath the surface. Maybe you've felt it, watching the sky just before a storm breaks, hearing your name called when no one's there, sensing something shift in the room before anyone speaks. You weren't wrong. You were simply touching the edge of something our ancestors once called magic, and which we now know as law. The word magic has always been a placeholder, a name we gave to forces we could feel but not measure. Cardano wasn't trying to take wonder away from the world. He was trying to give it back its foundation. He didn't reject the feeling. He rejected the fear. He saw that behind every miracle was emotion, behind every omen, a pattern, and what he offered wasn't a spell, it was a way of seeing. You don't need incantations when you have alignment. You don't need superstition when the laws themselves are more beautiful than any legend. Cardano walked through the world not as one looking for miracles, but as someone listening for patterns. He lived in an age where myths still clung to every unexplained crack in nature, but he didn't reach for gods or demons. He looked deeper beneath the noise of belief, and what he found wasn't sorcery, it was structure. He wasn't alone in that knowing. Centuries before him, Roger Bacon had whispered that all of creation moved by hidden processes, that what we called magic was only the part of nature we hadn't yet named. It wasn't rebellion, it was reverence. Not everything invisible is imaginary. Some things are just subtle. The idea of magia naturalis was born in that space. Not spells, not charms, not invocations, but the quiet art of learning how nature breathes. A rhythm sensed more than seen. Herbs that ease pain, not because a spirit blesses them, but because something in their chemistry speaks to something in ours. Stones that carry weight, not just in the hand, but in the field around it. The stars, not as gods with moods, but as markers of motion, as clocks we haven't yet learned to read. This wasn't the magic of superstition, it was its opposite. The difference mattered. One kind tried to control the world through force, fear, and fantasy. The other asked what the world was already doing and how we might move with it. One tried to bend reality, the other tried to understand it. One shouted at the wind, the other learned how to sail. Cardano stood firmly in the second camp. He believed that every effect had a cause, even if it hid beyond the reach of tools. He didn't see demons in illness. When others looked at a young girl trembling in a crowded street and called her possessed, he looked at the water she drank, the air she breathed, the fear she'd swallowed. He saw symptoms that rose from the body's chemistry, not spirits from another world. And still, he saw how belief worked like a current. He watched people be healed, not by a ritual, but by the certainty that something sacred had touched them. And he didn't mock that, he recognized it. What mattered wasn't the chant, it was the conviction. He saw that healing often followed expectation, that the body, spoken to in its own language, sometimes obeyed belief like it obeys medicine. That quiet observation would echo through time. Mesmer would come with talk of invisible fluids and magnetic force, and still no energy could be measured. When Franklin's commission tested it, they found not magnetism, but imagination. The mind reacting to suggestion, the skin prickling at nothing, and yet something real happened, because the belief itself was a kind of current. Cardano saw it centuries before the rest, that what we think, what we trust, what we're sure of, without knowing why those things shape us, not by spellwork, but through the quiet alchemy of perception meeting physiology. Not magic, not myth, just a law we haven't fully named yet. The way a thought can move matter, the way attention rearranges the unseen. And maybe you've noticed how symbols follow you. A dream that repeats until you finally listen. A number that shows up again and again just when you're about to make a choice. The same animal crossing your path in places it shouldn't be, not once, but 3 times in a row. You knew it meant something, even if no one else did. You didn't invent that knowing. It came from somewhere older. Jung understood that. He didn't see dreams, astrology, or omens as failed sciences. He saw them as languages, not spoken by the mouth, but by the psyche. Symbols weren't decorations, they were carriers of meaning. Alchemy, with its strange diagrams and impossible metals, wasn't a mistaken chemistry. It was a mirror. It gave shape to inner transformation. The planets didn't make things happen. They marked the readiness in us for something to happen. When the world outside shifted, something inside echoed back. He called it synchronicity, a kind of resonance between inner meaning and outer event, where cause isn't the point. The link isn't mechanical. It's emotional, symbolic. You feel it more than explain it. Like opening a book at the exact sentence you needed, or thinking of someone moments before they call. There's no logic to it, and yet there is order. The kind you sense more than solve. Meaning itself becomes a form of truth, not in the way facts prove, but in the way a song moves you before you know the words. It bypasses argument. It speaks to something buried but awake. Science, in its quiet way, is catching up. We now know that what you think, what you believe, what you expect, shifts the chemistry of your body. Hormones adjust, neurotransmitters follow. The line between thought and matter begins to blur. Focus changes pulse. Fear rewrites immunity. Joy lights up the brain like sunlight on water. Internal states move external outcomes, not by force, but by field. We call it energy now, though we still don't agree on what that means. People say love is energy. Intuition, too. Intention, they're not measured in volts or frequencies, but they leave traces. They change how we speak, how we stand, how we connect. You can walk into a room and feel something shifted, even if no one said a word. These aren't metaphors dressed up as science. They're realities we've lived without needing formulas. Rupert Sheldrake offered a shape for it. He spoke of morphic fields, invisible patterns that, once formed, make repetition more likely. Like once a thing has happened, the field around it remembers, not through memory as we know it, but through resonance. Like tuning forks across time, like a path forming in the forest, simply because someone walked it once. It sounds like ancient magic, and in a way, it is. The same sympathetic resonance once used to explain rituals and spells, now reframed through the language of biology and physics. Not dismissed, repurposed. What was once myth is now emerging pattern. Magic was never a lie. It was a signal that something real was happening, just not in ways we yet understood. What once lived in fire and feathers now lives in brainwaves and field lines, in hormones and heat and heart rate, in coincidence so precise it feels fated. So when you feel a shift you can't name, when a dream opens something you'd buried, when a stranger says what you were just thinking, you weren't mistaken. That was the real thing, not illusion, not imagination, not fantasy, something subtle and lawful moving through you, responding to you, because meaning moves, energy answers, and all the strange symbolic moments you've carried with you, they were never trying to trick you. They were trying to show you that you're already part of a pattern, too intricate to speak, but too familiar to ignore. Watch long enough, and you'll start to see it not just in visions or dreams, but in the shapes the world keeps choosing. A shell that curves like a galaxy, a sunflower turning its face to the sun in perfect spirals, the same arcs echoing in the vaulted ceiling of a cathedral built centuries ago. None of these forms copied one another, and yet they echo, as if some deeper rhythm hums beneath everything that grows, that expands, that reaches for light. Cardano belonged to a tradition that felt this order rather than theorized it, not as superstition, but as recognition. He walked in the lineage of Hermetic scribes, Stoic listeners, and Platonic architects who believed the universe was not random matter scattered by chance, but a kind of mind made visible, a body of intelligence, a living design moved by logos, not just word, but meaning itself, built into the bones of the world. Plato wrote of this in Timaeus when he spoke of the cosmos as a single living being born from thought, not accident, not a god above nature, but spirit within it, and geometry as its expression. To people like Cardano, this wasn't poetic imagery, it was instruction. Numbers were not mere tools for calculation, they were clues. Ratios weren't abstractions, they were evidence. The divine left fingerprints in spirals, in harmony, in structure, and mathematics was the one language quiet enough to read them. He saw what the ancients hinted at, and what Renaissance artists later practiced with discipline. That form isn't placed onto nature, it grows from within it. The golden ratio isn't imposed on the shell, it emerges as the shell grows. The Fibonacci sequence doesn't decorate the sunflower, it directs it. Growth follows rhythm, life follows order, and beauty isn't added, it arises from alignment. Artists knew this, not to decorate, but to reflect. Cathedrals weren't just built to awe, they were shaped to resonate. Their domes and chambers aligned with proportions found in leaves, in bones, in galaxies. They were temples of correspondence, structures that didn't imitate nature, but participated in it. Even the spiral, generated by adding Fibonacci squares again and again, it's not magic, it's simplicity generating complexity, a pattern unfolding because it cannot do otherwise. That same music lives in the heavens. Pythagoras taught that musical intervals followed exact mathematical relationships, that what we hear as harmony is number in motion. He believed the planets moved in this same rhythm, each orbit a note in a larger song. They called it the music of the spheres, and while the language has softened, the structure remains. Today, we find moons caught in perfect orbital resonance, Jupiter's satellites tugging on each other like dancers in time, never breaking rhythm. Look inward, and the same pattern pulses in blood and breath. Tree branches split the same way, lungs divide. Lightning forks the way veins travel. A snowflake forms 6 arms not from whim, but from the shape of the water molecule itself. DNA, that deep, silent script, coils into a double helix, held together by pairings that follow invisible laws. Cells migrate not randomly, but along gradients, like rivers following a slope. What seems soft is secretly shaped. Everything builds by ratio. Everything moves by code. There is no chaos here, only depth. Even the most intricate systems obey these underlying maps. Fractals that repeat across scales, symmetries that hold shape under pressure, structures that return like a phrase half remembered. The physicist Fritjof Capra called it the pattern that connects, and that's what this is. Not a theory, not a metaphor, but a real and quiet binding. Not superstition, law, what you've always felt as beauty, the part of you that quiets in a forest, that stills in front of stained glass, that draws spirals on paper without knowing why. It's not taste, it's recognition. Something in you is made of the same rhythm it sees. The shape is already inside you. The mystery isn't how these patterns appear in nature. The mystery is how we ever thought we were separate from them. Your body has always known the truth, even when the mind forgot. The way your lungs expand without instruction, how your pupils dilate in twilight, how your pulse shifts with the moon. These are not isolated functions. They are conversations. The universe moves and the body answers. And not in metaphor, in rhythm, in chemistry, in law. The ancients called it correspondence. As above, so below. Not as poetry, as principle. The shape of the cosmos mirrored in the shape of the human being. The arc of the spine echoing the curve of the sky. The spiraling loops of the inner ear repeating the forms of galaxies. The body was not seen as separate from nature, but as its expression, scaled and carried inward. Microcosm reflecting macrocosm, and through that reflection, remembering its place. Even now, when you look at a newborn child, the proportions whisper this truth. The head, too large. The limbs, slow to catch up. But they do catch up, following scaling laws, older than language. The way blood branches through the body, it follows the same principle a river does. Split, divide, curve, converge. Efficiency written in biology, not through design imposed, but design emerged. Cardano knew the body was not static. It tuned itself. He saw it as instrument, not statue, moved by pattern, entrained by forces around it. Modern science now speaks of this with different terms, but the motion is the same. Your heartbeat slows with music. Your breath syncs with someone across from you. The frequencies around you in sound, in light, even in silence, shape the ones within you. Music therapy isn't decoration. It's medicine that moves through vibration. Sound enters, and suddenly the nervous system begins to shift. Tears rise, or sleep deepens. Healing starts not from the mind, but from the return to coherence. Brainwaves, too, are waves for a reason. Meditation softens their speed, reshapes their range. Alpha, theta, delta, not mystical states, but measurable frequencies. You go there all the time without realizing it. When you stare at the sea, when you forget yourself in song. Even machines now speak the language Cardano once intuited. Pulses of magnetism can interrupt depression. Fields can wake memory. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, an invisible force guiding thought from outside the skull. The mind, it seems, is not a sealed container. It listens, which brings us again to fields, not fields of grass, but of pattern. Rupert Sheldrake called them morphogenetic, the forms that shape form. Invisible templates, not coded in genes alone, but remembered in space itself. A limb lost and somehow regrown, not because the body invents, but because it remembers. Cells return not just because of DNA, but because the shape was already waiting. Physics offers its own versions. Electromagnetic fields, quantum fields, spaces that are not empty, but full of instruction. A particle does not decide where to go. It is carried by the field that cradles it. David Bohm described it as enfoldment, that each part of the universe contains all others in folded form. Nothing is separate. Everything touches everything from the inside out. Even in matter's most durable shapes, the pattern repeats. Kepler saw platonic solids in the orbit of planets. Later, we'd find the same geometry in virus shells, in carbon molecules, in structures so small they escape the eye, but not the law. Sacred geometry. They called it not because it was mystical, but because it kept showing up, and always for a reason. These were not whimsical shapes. They were the most efficient, the most stable, the most resonant with the forces that shaped them. The world sings in form, not symbolically, literally. A violin string, a solar orbit, a river's bend, a neural wave, all of them moving to the same principles. Capra said, the forest is a symphony. Swimmy said, DNA is a temple. They weren't being poetic. They were telling the truth, the old way through metaphor that touches what equations still circle around. You are not separate from that music. You are made of it. The breath you took just now, it kept time with something larger. You've always been tuning, adjusting, answering the wider field around you, not through effort, through resonance. Control was never the point. Alignment was. And if all of life moves by resonance, then energy doesn't travel by pressure. It moves by sympathy. Not push, but pull. Not force, but correspondence. That's how you've always felt it, and that's where we go next. Sympathy, in its oldest sense, was never just about feeling for someone. It meant feeling with not through sentiment, but through connection. It meant that things, once touched, stayed connected, even when they appeared apart. It meant that resonance was the real bond, not space, not contact, not force, just tuning. The Stoics had a word for it, sympathia. To them, the cosmos was not a cold machine. It was one living whole, an organism of stars and stones and minds, each part woven into the others by a single thread. Nothing moved alone. When one part changed, the rest adjusted quietly, in kind. It wasn't metaphor, it was law. The Neoplatonists named it anima mundi, the world's soul, a subtle field in which matter and thought were never really separate, mind as pattern, form as expression, everything held within a single unfolding presence, where to affect one thing was, in some quiet way, to affect it all. You've heard this echoed in the Hermetic saying, as above, so below, a phrase often quoted, rarely felt for what it means. Not a riddle, a principle. The pattern of the heavens reflected in the body, in the breath, in the beat of a drum. The same logic that guides a planet's orbit, shaping the spiral in your thumbprint. Correspondence, not as coincidence, as structure. Long before these ideas were reduced to allegory, they were applied. Alchemists paired gold with the sun, silver with the moon, not because it sounded mystical, but because the metal's properties echoed the rhythms of those lights. Weight, color, conductivity, each trait a response to something bigger. Herbalists mapped plants to planets and organs, not by fantasy, but by years of careful noticing. They worked with cycles, with flavors, with temperature and terrain. Their systems weren't modern, but they weren't irrational either. They were attempts to name resonance using the language they had. Even astrology, at its root, was never about fate. It was a mirror, a way of watching how time itself moved through us. The sky didn't cause events. It reflected them the way a body reflects the mind that inhabits it. Archetypes moved through constellations, like seasons through trees. It wasn't meant to predict, it was meant to listen. That same listening shaped Jung's idea of synchronicity, a kind of connection that doesn't move by cause, but by meaning. A moment that arrives just as the inner world is ready to see it. A book falling open to the page you needed. A stranger saying the one word that shifts something you couldn't name. These aren't tricks of chance. They're moments of alignment, emotional resonance without mechanics. Like how a poem moves you, not by logic, but by echoing something already awake inside. And far from myth, modern science is beginning to meet these ideas, where they've always lived in structure, not in fantasy. Take quantum entanglement. Two particles, once linked, remain bound no matter how far apart. Change one, and the other shifts instantly. Not because they send a signal, because they are a signal shared, still humming, in sync. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, but it's real, and it doesn't fade with space. It echoes something ancient. That contact leaves imprint. That relationship defines behavior. That what was once near is still near, just in a subtler way. You see this too in the simplicity of tuning forks. Strike one, and another nearby begins to sing, not because it was touched, but because it was already tuned. The note finds its match. Resonance doesn't push, it calls. Rupert Sheldrake often returns to this. He reminds us that technology depends on this principle. Radios don't hear every frequency, they hear the one they're tuned to. Brainwave entrainment uses pulses to gently guide internal rhythms. Even television and wireless signals, they would have looked like sorcery once. Now we understand them through fields, through calibration, through sympathy of vibration. It has always been about relationship, not force, not mass, not proximity, but something quieter, the hidden pattern between things, the memory of contact, the echo of likeness. And that same sympathy doesn't just live in particles or circuits, it moves through biology, through breath, through bodies, remembering how to respond to the rhythm around them. You can see it in a petri dish. Long before thought enters the picture, heart cells placed side by side, pulsing out of sync, then slowly matching each other's beat. No nerves between them, no signal sent, just proximity, just connection, and then rhythm. A shared tempo emerging not through command, but through resonance. This isn't metaphor, it's how life behaves when left to its own intelligence. The pattern deepens as you look closer. Circadian rhythms in humans follow the light, even without clocks. Brainwaves shift in predictable phases. Wakefulness and sleep, focus and dream, each with its own frequency, its own signature hum. These aren't isolated circuits, they're layered harmonies, a symphony of entrained systems that whisper to one another through fields and feedback, not with force, but coherence. Rupert Sheldrake once asked what it would mean if memory wasn't only stored in brains or DNA, but also in fields, not just as data, but as presence. He called it morphic resonance, the idea that once a pattern forms in nature, it becomes easier to repeat. That a habit, once established, creates a path in the wider field, one that others can more easily follow. He pointed to animals in labs, rats, learning to run mazes, and found that as the task was mastered in one part of the world, rats elsewhere began to solve it faster. No training, no transfer, just timing. As though knowledge leaves an imprint in the air itself, and the next iteration picks it up without knowing why. This mirrors something ancient, the belief that essence could be passed, not through matter, but through sympathetic touch. That what one thing learns, the world learns with it. That form is not invented each time, but remembered. And there's this strange feeling you've had when someone's eyes are on you from across the room before they speak, before you turn, the flicker in your skin, the alertness that rises. You don't see it, you sense it, and it's not imagination. Sheldrake's research, often dismissed for its implications, found consistent signals. The body responding before the mind is even aware. Inside the body, this language continues. Mirror neurons fire when you see someone move, not just in recognition, but as if rehearsing the same motion. When someone cries and your throat tightens, That's not sympathy in the casual sense. It's physical entrainment, autonomic mimicry. The heart picks up the feeling before the words arrive. In hospitals, caregivers sometimes mirror the vital signs of the people they tend, not as performance, as pattern. Their bodies learning each other's rhythm, breath sinking, nervous systems folding into temporary accord. What once might have been called a sympathy of hearts is now studied in neurology, and still it feels no less mysterious for being mapped. This is what resonance looks like, not theory, experience. The crowd clapping in unison without instruction, strangers laughing at the same moment in a story, a song lifting your mood for no logical reason. These are not accidents, they are alignments. Even science has been here before. Newton's law of gravity was once labeled occult, not because it invoked magic, but because it described action without touch, one body affecting another across space. We've only deepened that mystery. Quantum fields, electromagnetism, the realization that fields, not forces, carry the structure of reality, that particles don't simply move, they respond, that they listen. David Bohm saw it clearly. To him, the universe was not made of parts, but of wholeness. He called it the implicate order, a field in which everything contains the pattern of everything else. Not metaphorically, literally, like a hologram, every shard reflecting the image of the whole, nothing isolated, everything enfolded. Ancient sympathia translated through physics, and still it returns to you. That moment when you just know, the quiet tug in your chest when someone far away is hurting, the way your body stills right before the phone rings. It might be unconscious pattern recognition, it might be bioenergetic resonance, it might be both, but it is real. We feel each other across distances. We sync when we don't mean to. We share pulses and patterns and waves without a word exchanged. Social science has shown that emotional bonds affect heart rates, brain activity, immune response. Even when apart, it's always been like this, like tuning forks in a vast chamber. Instruments, people, planets, sounding together, pulled into alignment by something older than speech. Sympathy was never magic. It was always nature, heard through stillness, a language without grammar, a law without pressure, a hum in the background that everything, even you, already knows how to follow. And if sympathy is how energy moves, not through push, but through likeness, then there's only one place left to look next. The place where your own field begins. The mind, the inner signal that speaks in thoughts, but also in tone. We've been taught to treat thought like vapor, private, fleeting, weightless. But thought has structure. Thought has form. It moves through the brain, not as mystery, but as motion patterns of electricity flowing through circuits of flesh. Neurons firing in rhythm again and again, shaping the way we see, feel, speak, remember. Each flicker of awareness, each image rising behind the eyes is not abstract. It's electrical. It leaves a field behind it. Cardano didn't have machines to see it, but he understood the impulse that mind is not separate from matter, but matter arranged with intention. Now, centuries later, we can measure the signals he sensed. With electrodes placed on the scalp, we read the waveforms of consciousness itself. EEG captures the electric pulses that rise and fall with every thought. MEG detects the magnetic fields. Those pulses generate the silent weather of the mind in motion. When you're calm, the brain pulses slowly alpha waves. When you're alert or anxious, the the frequency quickens beta. When you're deep in creativity or meditation, gamma waves begin to rise fast, coherent, synchronized. Your mental state isn't invisible. It has a fingerprint, a shape, a field. Consciousness, at its root, is rhythmic, a beat, a pattern. And when the pattern stops in deep sleep, in anesthesia, in coma, awareness fades. Not because something disappears, but because the current pauses, as if the light is still there, but the wire's gone quiet. And yet, we are not trapped by our wiring. We can shape it. Long-term meditators change the structure of their waves. Their thoughts move not faster, but more smoothly synchronized regions of the brain firing together like voices in harmony. Loving kindness meditations lift gamma. Focused mindfulness increases alpha. The field becomes coherent. Thought is no longer scattered. It concentrates. Intention carves new rhythms. These changes don't stay in the skull. The body listens. The heart responds to peace. Its electrical field softens. Calm thoughts slow its pace. Prayer, music, stillness, they tune the heart's energy signature, visible in ECG waves. Skin, too, reacts. Tiny changes in conductance show how emotion sweeps across the surface, even before it reaches language. The field moves outward. The mind speaks through the body without a word. It creates pressure, presence, posture. You've felt this. A room changes when someone angry enters. The temperature isn't different, but something else is. Mood transmits, tension carries, and sometimes a smile is enough to shift a current you didn't even know you were in. Cardano saw this in stories of exorcism, not as proof of demons, but as proof of belief that when people expect healing, something happens. We now call it placebo. A belief deep enough triggers a cascade. Endorphins rise, stress hormones drop, neural networks realign. In Mesmer's experiments, people shook and wept under false magnets. The effect was real. The source was mind. Expectation is energy, concentrated. And there are places where this influence slips past explanation. A mother who wakes moments before her child cries. A therapist who feels a wave of sorrow before a patient speaks. These aren't coincidences if they repeat. They are evidence of a field we don't yet know how to measure clearly, but whose effects ripple again and again. Even science is starting to reach toward the edge of that field. A 2020 3-minute study showed that slow neural rhythms, those gentle undulations of thought, can leave detectable traces outside the skull. Not just brain waves bouncing inward, but radiating outward, faint but real. The signal does not end at the skin. Sheldrake followed this intuition further. In thousands of trials, people consistently sensed when they were being stared at, even when all visual clues were removed. Not perfectly, but statistically above chance. Again and again, his data met resistance, but the pattern remained. Some part of the mind might extend beyond location, not floating, not magical, but tuned, projecting, receiving. Your thoughts are not sealed inside you. They ripple, they register, they disturb the air in ways too small to name, but not too small to feel. The mind does not end at the skull. It bends, it leaks, it touches, it leaves a trace on bodies, on space, on other minds. Cardano may not have drawn the field in diagrams, but he knew it by its effects. Belief, shifting illness, presence, altering outcomes, attention, changing the unseen. The rest is just detail. There is no hard line between your thought and your world. There is only a threshold and a field. That field isn't poetic, it's physical. John Joe McFadden called it the the semi-field, conscious, electromagnetic information. The idea is simple. Once you feel it, that your mind doesn't just happen inside the brain, it emerges from the synchronized waves flowing through it, that when neurons fire in rhythm, the electromagnetic field they generate becomes more than the sum of its parts. It becomes awareness, consciousness, as resonance, not trapped in tissue, but carried by charge. Others have traced similar patterns from different angles. Schrödinger saw no true division between mind and matter, only different faces of one underlying field. Bohm spoke of the implicate order, the universe, not as scattered parts, but as one unfolding whole, where each point contains every other in folded form. If the brain is part of that field, not cut off, but continuous, then intention might not stop at the skull at all. It might ripple through the same medium everything else moves through. And what seems like empty space, it isn't. 0-point energy, the quantum vacuum, these are names for the subtle pressure beneath everything. Even where nothing appears to exist, there is a hum, a vibration so small we only glimpse its effects. But it's there, a sea of possibility beneath form. If thought moves like a field, it moves through this. Small experiments have tried to find the edge of that influence. Focused attention, slightly shifting, random number generators. Intention, nudging probabilities by margins too small to notice in a single moment, but over thousands of trials, the pattern appears. The effect isn't loud, but it is steady. Again and again, these anomalies whisper that consciousness may carry more weight than we've been taught. Meta-analyses gather these whispers. What they find is not certainty, but consistency. A sliver of influence, too small to explain, too stubborn to dismiss. It doesn't rewrite physics. It just suggests that the mind leans, and the world, at times, leans back. Inside the body, this leaning becomes more visible. In biofeedback studies, people learn to alter their own brain waves, not through medicine, through attention. Heart rate slows, cortisol drops, alpha waves rise. Advanced meditators go further. Some can call up high-frequency gamma rhythms at will. Not imagination, not luck, just deep familiarity with their own field, tuned like an instrument that's been listened to long enough. The tools of science are starting to echo this tuning. Electromagnetic therapies, approved for depression, bone healing, pain relief. They don't cut, they don't inject, they pulse, they resonate. Patterned fields applied from the outside shift what happens within. If the body responds to external resonance, maybe it also responds to internal ones. The difference is only in origin, not in law. Cardano would have understood. To him, the mind was never supernatural. It was natural law, written too finely for the instruments of his day. What others called miracles, he called misread patterns. What we now confirm with electrodes and frequency charts, he sensed as cause and effect misunderstood. He wasn't casting spells, he was watching how thought shaped matter, how attention restructured motion. And now, even our language is catching up. Mind over matter doesn't mean magic anymore. It means the mind is matter, organized into fields that ripple outward. The brain is electric. The body is responsive. The space between us is not silent. Every thought is a frequency, every belief a current, and each one, whether fleeting or held, changes something. Not always visibly, not always instantly, but meaningfully. The quiet urge to call someone before they fall apart. The warmth that softens a room when you walk in with intention. The sense that a space holds the memory of what was said there. These aren't accidents. They are fields interacting. You don't only feel energy, you generate it. You shape the tone of a room with your silence. You alter the rhythm of another person's body with your presence. Even when you're unaware, you're transmitting. And yet, for much of history, we thought the only way to shape the world was from the outside in, through gestures, through symbols, through speech, wrapped in power. You can still see it. Dim chambers, lit by oil flame, words carved into stone, painted into walls, whispered into dark. The instinct runs deep. If you speak the right phrase, hold the right object, draw the right circle, the veil might lift, the world might obey. In Egypt, the dead were buried with spells etched into their tombs, not as metaphor, but as maps for the afterlife. The right utterance, placed at the right moment, was believed to guide the soul safely through the unknown. In Babylon, clay tablets held commands against disease, each line pressing invisible threats back into the earth. Incantations weren't hopes, they were orders. Flow out, they said. Leave this body. Depart. The Greeks recorded elaborate rites on papyrus, long lists of invocations to planets, gods, elemental forces. Their rituals were choreographed, hymns sung in precise order, planetary hours tracked, symbols traced in ash and oil. Every detail mattered, not for show, but for structure. In Jewish traditions, the sacred names of the divine were not just spoken, they were formed, drawn, counted, arranged into patterns. Each syllable carried weight, each vowel shimmered with history. These were acts of alignment, not just devotion, healing, protection, insight. All were bound to the integrity of how the name was used. Christian mysticism brought its own tools. Bones of saints placed near the sick, vials of water blessed to hold purity, cloth touched to the cross. These were not souvenirs, they were vessels holding something beyond their material form, echoes of holiness that might still ripple outward. When the Renaissance came, the language grew more layered. Hermeticists took these threads and wove them into systems of correspondences. Gold aligned with the sun, copper with Venus, symbols and planets, colors and days, all placed into grids that promised access to something beyond the visible. Ritual became a mirror of the cosmos, a stage where human action could echo divine order. But even then, Cardano saw the edges start to fray. He watched people recite without attention, perform without presence. They believed the shape of the ritual held the power, not the mind within it. They treated the gesture as a lever, forgetting it was meant to focus the field, not move it. He called these rituals simulacra, hollow forms, not false, but empty. Symbols divorced from signal, acts repeated in hope, not in knowing. He didn't need to burn the spellbook to disarm it. He simply saw what others ignored, that these performances moved people, but rarely moved nature. The exorcisms that worked, he noted, were not about demons fleeing. They were about the mind responding to belief. The miracle wasn't supernatural, it was psychological. It followed law, not magic. Others began to see it too. Where? Scott, quiet voices in an age of shouting, reminded the world that many so-called witches were sick, not cursed. That the rituals we feared were not windows into darkness, but mirrors reflecting misunderstanding. Today, science echoes their doubts, but also their nuance. The placebo effect doesn't mock belief, it reveals its reach. Words, settings, symbols, they matter. They shape outcomes, not because they contain force, but because they organize it. Benedetti said it clearly. Placebos are made of words and rituals, and these elements reshape the brain, not pretend, not inert. Psychobiological, real. Performance psychology finds the same truth. A charm carried into competition can sharpen focus, not through power stored in the object, but through meaning projected into it. Belief, attention, context, these align the nervous system. What looks like superstition might simply be an unspoken technology of inner coherence, and so the spell never had power of its own. It had your focus, your willingness, your pattern. That's where the energy moved, not in the flame or the phrase, but in the field you tuned by using them. The power was always inside, not in the ritual, but in what it could gather, what it could hold steady, long enough for something real to shift. Because when the shift does come, when the energy moves, it doesn't come loud. It doesn't crack the sky or flare through ritual flames. It hums. It slides in quietly, like a tuning fork that finally finds its match. Not from the symbol, but from the one holding it. Not from the gesture, but from the coherence underneath it. This is the difference Cardano saw. The difference between performance and precision, between spectacle and signal. A spell might dramatize the desire for power, but energy only responds when the signal is clean, when intention, breath, posture, thought all line up. Not forced, but aligned. Not demanded, but offered in resonance. Without that inner tuning, even the most intricate ritual is shadow play. It may move the psyche, stir emotion, calm the nervous system, and those things matter. But they move within. They prepare the space. They don't move the field. Cardano spent his life pulling the sacred out of superstition, not to destroy it, but to clarify it. He pointed not toward the supernatural, but toward the deeply natural, the kind of natural we don't see because it's too subtle, too patient. He saw that what people called magic was often their own physiology, reacting to stress, to silence, to memory. That the strange wasn't unnatural, it was just unmeasured. The wisdom wasn't in the right, it was in the body, in how stillness spread through the breath, in how awareness pulled the spine into a quiet shape, in how energy followed attention the way water follows slope. That's how the ancient systems knew it, not as metaphor, but as practice. In Qigong, in yoga, in Taoist breathwork, there are no invocations. There are no dramatic words, only rhythm, only discipline. The breath draws the energy, the mind holds it steady. The posture opens the pathway. Energy doesn't answer to command, it answers to coherence. These systems treat the body not as a vessel to be filled, but as an instrument to be tuned. The more in tune it becomes, the less force is needed. The more clearly it receives, the more easily it gives. There is no spell that can substitute for this, no shortcut. Even modern ritual psychology, in its clinical language, circles the same truth. That ritual works not because it changes the world, but because it changes the one performing it. It reduces noise, it heightens attention. It gathers the scattered parts of the self into a singular arc. From that arc, action becomes clear. Benedetti saw it plainly. He wrote that words, rituals, gestures, they can change the chemistry of the brain, not from belief alone, but from the focused condition that belief creates. Ceremony becomes a chamber, not to trap energy, but to invite alignment. So picture this, a torch lit ritual, full of voice and gesture, ancient syllables thrown into the air. A beautiful display, and it may calm, impress, inspire, but it moves the performer more than the field. Now picture something else. A practitioner seated in silence, the breath even, the posture firm, the mind not scattered, not forcing, just clear. No audience, no drama, but the space begins to shift. One is theater, the other is tuning, because real movement doesn't come from wanting. It comes from coherence. When thoughts, sensation, heartbeat, and awareness vibrate at one frequency, when nothing in you is resisting, doubting, performing energy doesn't need to be pushed. It flows. Not through will, through harmony. This was Cardano's quiet revolution. He showed that mastery doesn't begin with ritual. It begins with recognition, with knowing your own system deeply enough that you can align it like an instrument, not to play louder than the world, but to join it, to enter its rhythm, which leads us to the body itself, not just as a tool for energy, but as the tuning fork of nature, the part of you that feels first, the place where alignment begins. It was never designed to dominate the world around it. The body was made to listen, to receive, to sense a shift in the wind before it touches the skin, to register changes in the room before a word is spoken. It is not a machine, it is an instrument, a resonant chamber strung with nerves and rhythms and breath, not made for control, but for coherence. Cardano saw this clearly. To him, the human body was not an isolated object, but a mirror, a reflection of the stars, the planets, the seasons, the pulse of nature itself. The Renaissance was filled with these diagrams, the heart drawn as the sun, radiating warmth and movement, the head as a source of light, intellect, and divine order. These were not metaphors to be dismissed. They were maps showing how the great rhythms of the cosmos echoed within the small rhythms of the self. What lives in the sky lives in the chest. What moves above moves within. And this idea wasn't confined to Europe. Across the world, older traditions were already whispering the same truth. In traditional Chinese medicine, the body is a field of energy in motion, not solid but flowing. Qi, the life force, travels along meridians that map the surface and depth of the human form. These channels don't appear on autopsy tables, but they reveal themselves in healing. Acupuncture, acupressure, and breath practices use them like tuning wires, opening, balancing, restoring flow. Each organ is more than function. The liver carries anger, the lungs hold grief. Emotions and systems are not separate. They resonate, they echo the time of day, the season, the light. A body is not just personal, it's planetary. Ayurveda sees it similarly. Wind, fire, and water, not as elements in test tubes, but as patterns within. Vata, Pitta, Kapha. These are more than humors. They are energetic expressions, each one shaped by diet, weather, emotion, and time. A hot day flares Pitta, a cold wind stirs Vata. The body and the world move together in a long, slow conversation. Breath is at the center. Prana is not just oxygen, it is life carried on breath, intelligent, shaping, subtle. And when you practice pranayama, you are not just calming the lungs, you are retuning the system, charging the field. Breath as electricity, breath as message. The message is always the same. The body is not separate, it is the site of translation, whether in Qigong, yoga, or alchemical physiology. The view is consistent. You don't command the body, you align it. You don't fill it with power. You clear the noise so power can move through. Cardano knew that illness was more than disease. It was disharmony, a loss of rhythm. Healing then meant restoration, not only of organs, but of pattern. He wrote as if the body were a vessel of music and health was a return to tone. And when the body was attuned, when its internal timing matched the rhythm of the world, it could do more than survive. It could sense. It could resonate. It became not just a container of life, but a medium for life to express itself. It was antenna, receiver, field. This is what the older diagrams pointed to. A human not as isolated node, but as nested harmony. The head not only holding thought, but catching light. The heart not only pumping blood, but syncing with the sun. The breath not only feeding cells, but feeding the field. We have often dismissed these visions as symbolic. But what if symbol was the only language available to describe something we now begin to detect with instruments? What if meridians were never invisible, only too subtle for anatomy? What if humours and prana and chi were early attempts to describe field behavior in biological systems? The language shifts, but the structure remains. The body listens, the body responds, and when it is in tune, it tells us more than what hurts. It tells us where we are in the larger rhythm. It begins to feel the world before it arrives. You may have noticed it already, the tension that enters your chest before anyone speaks, the calm that spreads through you when someone else is at peace. These are not reactions, they're resonances. The body responds to what hasn't yet been named. And at the center of this sensitivity is the field the body carries and the frequencies it emits. The heart is not just a pump, it is an electromagnetic center, and the field it produces extends far beyond the boundaries of the skin. Measured by instruments, it stretches outward in waves, subtle but consistent. This field is hundreds of times stronger than the brain's, and yet we've often ignored its voice. But when the heart is coherent, when its rhythm becomes steady, balanced, in sync, that field changes. It becomes ordered, rhythmic. It entrains the brain. Calm in the chest creates clarity in the mind. Art math researchers have tracked this coherence. Emotional states like gratitude, compassion, stillness, they don't just feel good, they tune the body. They synchronize electrical and hormonal rhythms. They ripple outward. There is evidence that nearby people can be affected by this heart field coherence, even if no words are exchanged. This is not metaphor, this is signal. The body does not think in the same way the brain does, but it does know. It carries what we now call somatic intelligence, not logic, but sensation as guidance. A spike of heat in the gut, a tightening across the scalp, the sudden softness in the chest that makes you pause before saying what you were about to say. These are not byproducts, they are signals. The body speaks in rhythm, not reason. Emotion is not just stored in the mind, it's stored in the tissues, the hormones, the pulse. A rapid heartbeat during anxiety is not a symptom, it's a guide. The nausea during grief, the wave of heat during shame, these are not illusions, they're physiological messages processed in the whole field of being. Every part of the body vibrates, cells, organs, bones, glands, each with a measurable frequency. And those frequencies shift with thought, breath, intention. Meditation alters brain waves. Focused breathing changes heart rate variability. Concentration modulates cortisol. Stillness rearranges the nervous system's tone. Ancient energy systems, chakras, meridians, nadis, were early languages for this vibrational reality. They didn't speak in voltage or hertz, but in correspondence and flow. And while science hasn't mapped these structures anatomically, it has begun to notice their effects. Points touched in acupuncture affect brain regions. Patterns followed in breathwork change immune response. Something real moves beneath the metaphor. Biofeedback makes it visible. Sensors reflect what's happening inside. Brainwaves slowing under meditation. Heart rhythms smoothing under steady breath. Neurofeedback teaches the mind to tune itself, not just to relax, but to harmonize. These are not external forces acting upon the body. They are inner adjustments taught through reflection, mastered through attention. When coherence comes, when breath, pulse, thought, and presence align, measurable things begin to change. Inflammation decreases, pain lowers, hormones shift. This is not mystical healing, it is resonance. The body tuning itself back to the field it emerged from. It's not difficult to imagine it as sound. A luminous instrument, arms slightly open, chest lifted with breath, the nervous system like strings, emotions like fingers moving across them, thoughts arriving like wind on hollow wood, vibrating through tendon and bone. The music is internal, but the orchestra is everything around it. Sunlight, pressure, temperature, presence, memory, sound. Cardano would have called this harmony, like mercury and sulfur in alchemy. He saw the body not as matter to be fixed, but as something to be refined, aligned, tempered like a blade, or tuned like an organ. Health was not just the absence of pain, it was tone, congruence, the right note ringing in the right space. Illness is dissonance. Healing is remembering the pitch you're made of. And when that pitch returns, when your inner tone finds the outer chord again, something begins to happen. You sense things before they arrive. The wind changes, and you feel it in your spine. A friend's mood reaches you before their voice. A moment unfolds as if it had already passed through you once before. This isn't imagination. It's the field you carry, vibrating in sympathy with what hasn't yet taken form. And if the body can feel the future, then perhaps time is not what we thought it was. Perhaps energy doesn't just move through space. Perhaps it echoes through time. And perhaps intention, once sent, travels farther than we can follow. That's where we now turn. Not everything moves in a straight line. Not light, not memory, not time. What you think of as a timeline ticking forward, second by second, is not how the deeper rhythm moves. You felt this. A scent pulls you back into a childhood room. A word changes the meaning of something that happened years ago. Time does not hold still, it breathes. Cardano never saw time as a clock. He saw it as a pattern, alive, cycling, intelligent. He lived in a world where the movement of planets wasn't background, it was instruction. To him, the cosmos did not pass by overhead. It wrote itself into the soul. Saturn's slow path left a trace of depth and limitation. Venus wove her rhythms into longing and harmony. The sky was a rhythm too large for a single life to contain, yet small enough to echo inside a human heart. In his De Arcanis Eternitatis, Cardano spoke of a kind of eternal memory, a soul that carries not just who we've been, but what we've intended, even before we've acted on it. Time didn't just move through you, you shaped it. The past wasn't finished, the future wasn't empty. Both waited quietly for the imprint of choice. And this isn't only mysticism. Chaos theory shows how a single moment, a breath, a pause, a word can spiral into outcomes far beyond what it seemed to touch. What begins as a soft edge becomes an avalanche. Intention, no matter how quiet, may not end where we think it does. Time loops back. It folds. It answers to its own structure, a pattern that echoes rather than marches. In physics, the fabric stretches even further. Wheeler's delayed choice experiment showed that a choice made now can affect what a particle did before it was observed. A photon behaves as a wave or a particle, not simply because of what it is, but because of how it is seen after it travels. It's not fiction, it's experiment. It means the act of witnessing folds back into the timeline, reshaping what seemed already done. Wheeler said, "We participate in the creation of the past, not with control, but with awareness, as if the moment becomes real only once it has meaning." And in the mind, time moves differently again. Neuroscience shows that our experience of time is tied to attention, not measurement. In grief, a second can stretch. In awe, an hour collapses. We don't live in time as a fixed stream. We live in time as a felt texture. The brain organizes memory not by sequence, but by weight. What matters, not what came first. The ancients knew this too. Aboriginal Dreamtime tells of a layer where past, present, and future coexist, not fantasy, but structure. Tibetan and Amazonian cosmologies speak of spiral time, layered cycles, recurring echoes that move through lifetimes and across thresholds. In these traditions, time is not escaped, it is read, it is entered. The soul doesn't forget, and the future isn't blind. All of it, astrology, chaos theory, quantum physics, meditation, memory, may be using different tools to point to the same thing, that time is not distance, it is relationship. That a choice made in stillness may echo forward and be felt later as coincidence. That a shift in perception now may reach backward and change the shape of a memory. That what you intend deeply, sincerely, does not vanish. It weaves itself into the shape of what comes. Time listens, and sometimes it speaks back. And sometimes it doesn't just speak back, it arranges itself quietly, precisely, like a needle threading silk. Cardano believed that the heavens didn't predict events as fate, but as resonance. He looked at planetary rhythms not as forces imposing outcomes, but as patterns, containers of potential. The stars and their movements echoed something already stirring inside you, a kind of time signature. And, if read closely enough, it revealed the soul's participation in its own unfolding. In this view, your moment of birth isn't just a biological beginning, it's an intersection, a meeting point between inner inclination and cosmic rhythm. Celestial alignments weren't puppeteers pulling strings, they were mirrors. The sky held a shape, and that shape sang into the shape of you. That idea that intention can be planted backward through resonance might seem strange until you've experienced it. A thought from weeks ago returning in a stranger's mouth, a choice you nearly made echoing into someone else's timing. Jung gave this feeling a name: synchronicity, a moment when outer events and inner life move in step without a cause, but with undeniable meaning. You think something, and it appears. You struggle with a question, and the answer shows up in the next conversation, song lyric, overheard phrase. There's no logic that links them, but it feels like an answer. And that feeling isn't imagination, is recognition. Something fits. Skeptics say this is bias, pattern seeking in noise. But even they admit the mind reacts to these collisions with genuine emotional weight. Mystics, on the other hand, say it's the universe responding not with voice, but with arrangement. Either way, the experience is the same. Something in you moves, and the world stirs with it. These echoes stretch further. In dreams, people describe seeing fires that hadn't yet started, flights they avoided without knowing why, a room they've never entered but recognize instantly. These aren't always supernatural. Neuroscience points to unconscious processing hints picked up below awareness, shaped into imagery. But to Cardano, that didn't reduce their value. It proved the soul could lean ahead, feel down the line of its own thread. He might say dreams are how the soul rehearses time, not passively watching, but sensing what's coming or what's still echoing back. If a soul can perceive, can many souls shape? The Global Consciousness Project, a long-running experiment, set up random number generators around the world. During emotionally charged global events, those generators became slightly less random. It's subtle, debated, but consistent enough to ask, what if intention, especially collective intention, leaves a fingerprint? Jung and physicist Wolfgang Pauli imagined a psychoid field, a layer where matter and mind meet. Not metaphorically, but structurally. It suggests that emotion, focus, and meaning don't just exist inside us. They impress themselves into the world. Perhaps not with force, but with influence. Perhaps not always visible, but never entirely absent. Think of the way a tuning fork hums without touch when another nearby sings its same note. Imagine it across time. The physicist at her lab table, adjusting a quantum trial. The mystic across the ocean, dreaming of firelight and ash. A child drawing stars without knowing the comet that will come. Somewhere in the overlap, the line bends, a beat sinks, a thread pulls taut. Time becomes not a march, but a murmur. The past waiting to be reseen. The future leaning close, listening for its cue. And when you notice the rhythm, not just the event, but the way it fits, something shifts. Not in the world, but in how you observe it, how you meet it. And that changes what it becomes. Because observation, as you'll now see, is never neutral. It is influence, subtle, steady, and precise. When you witness something with care, your nervous system responds, heart rate shifts, micro muscles activate, even the chemistry in your saliva changes. That attention isn't passive. It signals, it shapes. The body reads what you focus on, but so does the world. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance theory proposed that the act of witnessing doesn't just record an event, it engraves a pathway. Memory is not just in brains, but in nature. Patterns, once formed and seen, echo forward. If one rat solves a maze in one city, another learns faster in another. That's the premise. Controversial, yes, but it rhymes with the ancient belief that to see a thing fully is to feed its return. In the Vedic view, perception is world-making. Brahman, the absolute, gives rise to Maya, the shifting forms through the act of witnessing itself. In the Kabbalistic model, God speaks creation into being, but human perception continues. The utterance, reality, then is unfinished. It responds to how we see it, and even more, to how we feel as we see. Clinical science supports this, even if it speaks another language. People who believe their food is nourishing show different metabolic markers than those who don't, even if the food is identical. It's not imagination. It's insulin, leptin, cortisol. A mind state writes a body state. Perception carves physiology. In the lab, researchers test the effects of focused attention on random number generators. Meta-analyses show a tiny effect but persistent, too small to control, too consistent to dismiss. Intention, it seems, leaks into the system, not enough to steer a coin flip, but enough to nudge the field. And then there's the way belief itself, stripped of superstition, reshapes outcomes. The placebo effect is not wishful thinking. It's neurotransmitters responding to expectation. It's the immune system reacting to symbolic meaning. Benedetti writes that rituals and words can change the circuitry of the brain, not metaphorically, measurably. The deeper synthesis is this: observation is an act of energetic calibration. You tune to what you witness, and the system, whether it's a person, a particle, or a moment, tunes back. That's why reverence matters, not in a religious sense, but in the sense of precise attention, the kind that steadies the hand of a surgeon, the gaze of a painter, the heart of someone watching a loved one sleep. To observe like that is to enter the field, to shape it from within. The poetry becomes physiology. The symbolism becomes subtle causality, a whisper of thought, a flicker of presence. And the world bends ever so slightly in response. What you see changes what is, what you feel, as you see even more so. And what you do with that knowing defines the ethics of energy itself. To perceive is to participate. That participation, even when silent, carries charge. The more aware the gaze, the more coherent its influence, not because of force, but because of alignment. Nature responds like a mirror, not because it mimics, but because it completes. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance proposes that the very act of noticing, of pattern recognition, contributes to the pattern's persistence. What has been seen is easier to see again. What has been practiced or thought becomes energetically available, like a groove carved into a shared field. This is the difference between solitude and isolation. A single act of attention can ripple outward, altering what others may touch, even across time zones, even without awareness. In the lab, rats, learning, mazes echo across the world, as if learning becomes easier simply because it has happened somewhere already. It's controversial, yes, but it fits a long tradition of knowledge passed without words through tuning, not telling. Mystical traditions have long treated consciousness not as a bystander, but as the source code of experience. In Vedanta, Brahman doesn't observe the world, it becomes it. In Kabbalah, the uttered name calls form into being. In Hermetic thought, perception and creation are twins, bound by reflection. What modern medicine now shows in small ways, hormone shifts from belief, measurable healing from intent, is what older systems intuited without equations. Attention changes the chemistry of the body. Intention shifts the signals. There is nothing metaphorical about insulin reacting to thought or cortisol responding to ritual. These are forms of energetic tuning, field to body, body to field. Placebo, in this light, becomes an ancient tool, repackaged in clinical language. Not deception, but belief made biological. You believe the capsule will help. It does. The brain doesn't need the molecule, it needs the meaning. Meta-analyses in parapsychology suggest tiny but consistent statistical skews. When people direct intention toward machines. It's not enough to rewrite physics, but it's also not easy to explain away. These effects don't shout, they hum, but they hum the same way that a presence in a room can change the room, quiet but real. To observe with care is to offer coherence, and the world, like any field, responds better to coherence than chaos. A harsh look can wilt, a soft gaze can soothe. This isn't romanticism, it's resonance. Imagine the surface of a pond. One person stares with tension, the water bristles. Another observes with calm, the ripples soften. The pond doesn't care who you are, it reacts to how you show up. This is what the mystics meant when they said, the world responds to reverence. It isn't about submission, it's about rhythm. When you meet the world with clarity and coherence, something shifts, quietly but lastingly. It's the difference between pushing and inviting, between imposing your will and becoming transparent enough for will to pass through you without distortion. In this space, energy does not demand, it listens. It doesn't strike, it aligns. The ones who understood this didn't always leave behind books or systems. They left impressions, gestures, symbols, stories that still hum with quiet coherence. You find them in carved labyrinths, in the arrangement of stones, in the mathematical poetry of sacred geometry, the language of restraint embedded in form. These were not decorations, they were diagrams of internal states, tools not for control, but for orientation. Symbol became compass, image became interface, and the subconscious, once treated as murky depth, began to surface as a conductor of precision. Because the subconscious is not chaos, it is patterned, fluent in metaphor, drawn to rhythm. It understands suggestion more than command, and symbol more than instruction. Energy moves best through what it can recognize. This is where image, sound, word, and ritual find their real function, not in spectacle, but in signaling. A chant is not magic because it is ancient. It's effective because it organizes breath and attention into rhythm. A sigil is not power because it's secret. It holds charge because it encodes intention in visual shorthand that the body can feel. When intention, emotion, and symbol are aligned, the subconscious recognizes the request. It responds, not with fireworks, but with coordination. Subtle shifts in sensation, perception, orientation. The inner field begins to organize, and from that quiet arrangement, energy follows, not as something pulled or commanded, but as something welcomed, drawn in through congruence, a resonance, not a reaction. This is the space Cardano pointed to when he spoke of nature's laws as rhythms to be understood, not violated. He saw that lasting effect came not from force, but from accord, not from spellcraft, but from symbolic fluency. That fluency begins where spectacle ends, with stillness, with care, with the willingness to watch, not just what energy is doing, but what it's responding to inside you. And when it does respond, it reveals what's hidden, not just in the field around you, but in the field within. The unspoken wants, the lingering tensions, the pieces of self, still masked in performance. Energy doesn't judge, but it does mirror. This is where cause takes its true shape. In many Eastern traditions, karma is not punishment, it is pattern, an imprint set in motion that seeks to complete its curve. The force you apply returns not because it is moral or immoral, but because it disturbs balance. Correction becomes inevitable. What you send out must pass through what you are. If there's distortion, unmet grief, concealed arrogance, denied fear. It leaves a signature, and that signature ripples back, not always immediately, but always proportionally. Jung called this the shadow, not evil, but unconscious. The traits you reject, disown, or displace do not dissolve. They crouch behind your efforts, shape your tone, twist your intention. You reach for clarity, but what arrives is confusion. You try to heal, and instead control. The healer who demands loyalty, the magician who begins to fear betrayal, the visionary who loses their way in their own reflection. These aren't failures of technique. They're returns of unacknowledged parts. As above, so below. Hermeticism speaks it plainly. You cannot impose harmony from a place of internal division. The energy around you will match the architecture within you. This is why Cardano distrusted spectacle and control. He knew what happens when force meets unprepared ground. The illusion of mastery cracks. The work collapses back onto the self, not as punishment, but as proof of law. Real influence doesn't flare. It hums. It is quiet, because it is complete, and it arises only when the practitioner has ceased to perform and begun to align. There is no shortcut to that. No word or sigil or gesture that bypasses the self. Power without stillness invites backlash. Movement without anchoring invites fragmentation. That's why the deepest changes often appear the smallest. A single breath held with awareness, a moment of restraint, a choice to pause before projecting will. These are the turns that reshape the current. Cardano called it foolishness, going beyond what the body, the mind, or nature is ready to meet. But he also knew what waited in its place. Not silence as absence, but silence as strength. Not withdrawal, but reverence. Because real mastery begins when the self is no longer center, but vessel. When influence is no longer the goal, but consequence. When energy doesn't obey, but returns. That's where symbols begin to matter. Not as decoration, but as maps. Not for the intellect, but for the field of the body-mind, where subtle shifts precede action. Symbols have shape, charge, pattern. A serpent coiled is not just a picture, it's a rhythm. A labyrinth is not just a puzzle, it's an invitation to spiral inward, where the conscious mind gives way to recognition older than memory. Carl Jung spoke of symbols as energy containers, archetypes, capable of holding and transmitting psychic force. He observed recurring motifs in dreams, myths, and rituals. Towers collapsing, rivers flooding, twins separating. These weren't just literary. They marked real transformations within the psyche, echoes of emotional tides rippling under conscious life. A crumbling building in dream may mirror the breakdown of ego structure, a locked door, the part of self not yet entered. Every image points. Cultures long before Freud or Jung already treated dream symbols as divine clues. Ancient Egyptian priests kept dream chambers beneath temples. Those seeking answers would sleep there, hoping to receive a message. The Greeks did likewise at Asclepian sanctuaries, where healing came through dreams decoded by trained interpreters. The Delphic oracle, seated in trance above vaporous chasms, spoke in cryptic metaphor. Meaning wasn't told, it was unfolded. Cardano, centuries later, continued this lineage with his Somniorum Sinazorum, his book of dream interpretations. For him, each dream was a dialogue between the individual soul and the universe's hidden order. Symbols he wrote, borrow from both nature and the divine. A lion might not mean danger, but rising strength. Rain might not foretell gloom, but inner purification, meaning lived not in the image alone, but in its felt context. That approach lives on in modern dream work, Jungian analysis, sacred journaling, even secular therapy return again and again to the symbol, not to decode it as a fixed message, but to feel its resonance. A burning house might mean collapse, but it might also mean cleansing or urgency, or the moment just before awakening. Dream symbols change shape depending on how they're held, which is why no dream manual suffices. One must feel into the metaphor, match it to the energetic current of waking life. A dream of falling, recurring over weeks, might correspond with overstimulation or spiritual descent or unresolved grief surfacing. It matters less what the dream says than what it stirs, and some symbols persist over generations. A mother's fear might dream again in her daughter, the scent of fire, the edge of a cliff. These aren't personal neuroses. They are fields passed forward, emotional frequencies encoded in the body. Studies in epigenetics have shown trauma can echo in descendants' biology. It's no leap to see dreams as one way those echoes try to speak. In this way, dreams are more than reflection. They are energetic barometers, registering internal misalignments or anticipatory tremors of coming shifts. The subconscious senses first, and while waking mind hesitates, the dreaming field sketches the motion in symbol. A key turns, a gate appears, the forest floods, none of it random. The soul speaks in signs, and when we learn to read them, energy begins to move with us, not just through us. Carl Jung called symbols the natural language of the psyche, organic containers of Phos, not manufactured signs. A spiral wasn't a decoration, but an image of expanding consciousness. The labyrinth marked an inward turn, descent before emergence. Towers collapsing in dreams often pointed not to destruction, but the undoing of ego structures too rigid to grow. This way of seeing wasn't new to Jung. He stood in a long stream. Ancient Egyptian priests treated dreams as channels from the divine. Temples maintained dream chambers for incubation, rites of sleep where answers were invited. The Delphic oracle, speaking from trance, answered not with logic, but with metaphor. A traveler would hear not whether to act, but what wind stirred the future, ambiguous on purpose. So the seeker would be forced to feel. Cardano continued this lineage with his Somniorum Sinisiorum. His dream interpretations didn't give fixed meanings. They proposed correspondences, what the mind's symbols might echo in the cosmos. A cracked bell might reflect inner dissonance. A fruitless tree might indicate exhaustion of spirit, not of soil. For him, dreams weren't riddles to be solved, but harmonics to be listened into. Today's dreamwork, journaling, archetype mapping, sacred dreaming traces back to these traditions. Symbols are approached less as puzzles and more as invitations. Jungian therapy uses recurring dream images to track energetic patterns, not just thoughts. Practitioners of dream incubation focus not on interpretation alone, but on participation, preparing the body and mind before sleep to call a vision forth. What matters most is how these symbols behave. A dream of a leaking roof, often that's a boundary, the psyche's edge letting something in. A burning forest might mark a purge, a necessary raising of belief systems that no longer nourish. A wolf by the door Fear, yes, but also readiness, the wild, returning. Symbols repeat when energy repeats. They reappear when attention hasn't landed, when the field is trying again to be heard. They cluster during emotional thresholds, illness, decision, loss, when the waking mind is unsure, but the deeper self is already listening. What doesn't yet make sense is already being shaped. The body, in sleep, becomes an instrument of perception. Its rhythms shift, its senses quiet. In that quiet, subtle tremors can register imbalances. The mind might suppress in day, tensions just forming. Dreams may express these in code, floods, chases, closed mouths, broken clocks, but they are signals. And often they arrive ahead of time. Some dreams feel like warnings, some feel like echoes, others like ceremonies. A door opens in a place you've never been, but somehow recognize. A voice tells you something simple, but you wake as if marked. These are not just scenes. They are initiations, miniature rites woven through sleep, timed to moments your soul needs most. Jung wrote, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. That door isn't locked, but it requires reverence. To walk through it is to enter a space where the subconscious, the symbolic, and the energetic converge, not to control, but to commune, not to interpret, but to be changed. That shift begins where force yields to rhythm, where doing gives way to sensing. In Taoist philosophy, this is known as Wu Wei, the art of effortless action. It does not mean inaction. It means not pushing against the current, but learning to move with it. A skilled surfer doesn't overpower the ocean. They wait, listen, and then move at the precise moment when wave and will align. Cardano never used the term, but his thinking echoed it. He warned that pressing too hard against nature provokes not results, but recoil. He favored observation, sharpened into sensitivity. Even his mathematics was filled with intuitive leaps, not as imposition, but as cooperation with the unseen. He knew that life didn't yield to domination, only to presence. This is not a foreign idea to the West. In psychology, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called it flow, a state where self-consciousness disappears and effort becomes seamless. Athletes know it, musicians, surgeons. It's the place where mastery happens, not through control, but surrender to the moment. And that moment is never seized, it is entered. In the flow state, heart rate and brain waves shift, cortisol drops, awareness expands, everything aligns. Not because the mind is commanding, but because the mind has stepped aside. The body becomes the vessel, the skill, a current, the moment, alive and guiding. The Stoics recognized this too. Epictetus taught that freedom comes not from controlling the world, but from mastering one's inner climate. That wisdom is learning what belongs to you, your reactions, your choices, and what never has. The winds of the world will always blow. You steer by the sail, not the storm. But history is full of those who couldn't accept that. Wilhelm Reich believed he could harness life energy itself, contain it, accumulate it, direct it. His invention, the Orgon box, was meant to store vitality, but the more he pushed, the more isolated he became. Institutions turned against him. His work was seized, his books burned, his name left in ruins. He tried to own a force meant to be witnessed, and it turned on him. Even he seemed to know. The living, he wrote, are not obedient. His tragedy wasn't in his vision, but in his refusal to yield to something greater than himself. This pattern repeats in magic, in science, in politics. The harder the grip, the louder the fracture. The universe does not respond to coercion. It responds to coherence. It responds to those who tune to it, not those who bend it. And those who learn this, not just intellectually, but in the fibers of their being, begin to see a different kind of power. One that arises not from possession, but from alignment. Not from pushing forward, but from knowing when to stand still. And in that stillness, something remarkable begins. Attunement. The Eastern sages called it wu-wei, not actionless, but unforced, effortless, because it is timely, like a blade of grass that bends in wind but rises again, or a bird that banks mid-air without strain. The energy is not controlled, it is met. A surfer, for instance, doesn't conquer the ocean. They wait. They read the wave's shape, its weight, its rhythm, and then one motion. Precision, not power. It looks like mastery, but it is really surrender, sharpened into skill. This is wu-wei. Lao Tzu, in the Tao Te Ching, wrote, "The soft overcomes the hard, the yielding overcomes the strong." To modern ears, it sounds poetic, but it's physical. The body heals when it relaxes. Breath deepens when it lets go. Muscles gain strength, not only through tension, but through recovery timing, not strain, defines endurance. This principle re-emerges in Western psychology as flow, a state of heightened performance where effort disappears. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi studied athletes, artists, scientists, those who enter deep, creative focus, where the sense of self dissolves and time expands. He found that people at their best weren't striving, they were synchronizing. The ego quiets, awareness narrows, movement becomes fluent. A pianist doesn't think of each note. A climber doesn't plan each grip. A surgeon, mid-operation, does not force precision, they allow it. Flow arises when mind, body, and moment meet in alignment. Even the Stoics, often misunderstood as rigid, understood this. Epictetus taught that our freedom lies not in what happens, but in how we respond. We don't command the winds, he said, but we can adjust the sail. This is not submission, it's clarity, knowing where energy is wasted and where it wants to go. And when this is forgotten, when power becomes pursuit rather than partnership, things crack. Wilhelm Reich believed he could trap and direct life force itself. His orgone accumulators were meant to heal, elevate, transform, but the deeper he dug, the more rigid he became. He alienated colleagues, clashed with governments, lost his freedom, not because his ideas lacked value, but because his grip on them refused to soften. Even he sensed it. To be free, he wrote, means the absence of compulsive striving. But he could not stop striving. He tried to force open something that only opens when trusted. His story isn't a dismissal, it's a mirror. Without attunement, even brilliance becomes a burden. Without listening, even vision leads to fracture. What wu-wei, flow, and stoicism each show from such different worlds is that real power isn't imposed, it's received. It's not in the grasp, but in the hand that knows when to open. It's not weakness to yield. Cardano saw it as the beginning of wisdom, a kind of listening that allows energy to meet you cleanly rather than bend under your demand. To him, the truest work of power began in restraint, not silence out of fear, but silence that filters noise, sharpens perception, and makes one ready to respond with care. Real strength isn't loud, it's clear. A still pond doesn't chase the sky, it reflects it. The open hand doesn't grasp, yet it's the one ready to hold. Even stone, with time and weather, learns its shape by surrendering to what passes over it. There is a kind of poise in nature that never forces. Trees yield to storm, roots move around rock. The power is in adaptation, not domination. This is the paradox of mastery. The less you control, the more you become a conduit for what wants to flow through. The negotiator who holds silence lets the other speak into understanding. The athlete who pauses sees the opening. The monk who sits in stillness shifts a room simply by being aligned. You begin to feel where your presence lands, where tension ripples, where ease returns. The Tao reminds, nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water, yet nothing can wear away the hard like it. This isn't philosophy as metaphor, it's reality as practice. Softness isn't absence, it's precision. And that precision becomes choice. When to speak, when to step aside, when to act with exact force, no more, no less. Mastery, then, is not performance, it's calibration. Imagine a leaf detaching from its branch, not torn, not cut, simply released. It drifts on the current of air or water, not fighting direction, not resisting flow. It doesn't stop being itself, but by moving with the world, it goes farther than force ever could take it. The vessel does not shape the wine, but it carries it, protects it, delivers it, and so the self becomes vessel, not by emptying entirely, but by refining what it holds, by clearing distortion, by tuning to what surrounds it. This is not passivity. It's trust that the rhythm of the world responds to clarity, not command. In this, Cardano's old teachings return with new resonance. The invitation is not to conquer the current, but to become still enough to feel where it already wants to go. That is where transformation begins, not from the world pressing in, but from the symbols rising up. Carl Jung called them archetypes, not inventions, but inherited forms of energy, ancient scripts written into the collective psyche. In dreams and myths, they appear again and again. The labyrinth, the serpent, the sea, the shattered tower. They aren't there to entertain, they are signposts in the terrain of the soul. The spiral is not just a shape, it's the path of becoming. The door isn't just a threshold, it marks a readiness. When the dream shows fire, the old self is already burning. When it shows water, something deeper is asking to be felt. Egyptian priests once recorded dreams like weather. The oracle at Delphi answered questions in riddles, symbols, too potent for logic. These weren't dismissed as hallucinations, they were read, understood, acted upon. Cardano followed in that lineage with Somniorum, Cinesiorum, treating dreams as a text, layered in metaphysical code. Today, that sacred code hasn't vanished. It's been renamed Jungian analysis, active imagination, sacred journaling, dream incubation, each a modern form of initiation, each a way to enter the darkened temple of sleep and return with fragments of light, a dream of a cracked mirror, a staircase that ends in the sky, a voice you don't recognize saying something you can't forget. These are not accidents, they are energetic transmissions, guidance not in plain speech, but through metaphor, the language of the soul's field. A leaking roof might mean more than weather. It may point to an unseen, energetic boundary eroding under emotional strain. A burning forest may not only signal destruction, it may mark the sacred clearing of inherited beliefs. These images feel charged because they are. The subconscious doesn't speak English, it speaks energy. The body listens in sleep. Heart rate shifts, breath changes, neurotransmitters reconfigure, and with it, memory not just of this life, but echoes from before. The stress of an ancestor, the silence of a forgotten loss, the longing of a past you've never met. It moves through the dream field like heat through metal. And if you're paying attention, you don't just interpret, you remember. The dream isn't random, it's recognition, a whisper from a deeper chamber, a hint that you've seen this before, somewhere behind the veil of time. The dream doesn't invent, it reminds, like the curve of a shell you've never touched, but always known, like something ancient waking inside. Jung called it the collective unconscious, a psychic reservoir shared by all people, containing the forms and forces that shape human experience. He saw dreams not as random, but as messages from this deeper layer. Symbols in dreams are not invented, they're remembered. A spiral doesn't just appear, it arises from the body's memory of growth, the seeds unfolding, the galaxy's spin. These forms, the door, the tower, the ocean, the labyrinth, aren't just images, they're energetic coordinates, the sea signals, immersion in the unconscious. A tower falling points to the collapse of ego structures. A door opens only when something within is ready to step through. The symbol is the soul's memory, speaking in its native tongue. Ancient mystery schools taught not through facts, but through symbols, story, and initiation. The seeker descended into the symbolic underworld, not to discover new truths, but to retrieve what had been buried. When they returned, they didn't say, "I've learned." They said, "I remember." Esoteric texts speak of an unimpaired memory, something the soul regains when it's ready. The journey was not forward, but inward. Myth echoed this path. Odysseus, returning not just to Ithaca, but to himself. The Buddha did not receive knowledge from the tree, he awoke to what had always been there. The spiral does not stretch away, it curls back to the center. Today, psychology maps this same terrain. A person in therapy may suddenly feel a memory stir. Not factual, but emotional. Cellular, embodied, not new, but familiar. In breathwork or deep meditation, insights rise that feel old, as if spoken once in childhood or in a dream from years ago. This is why certain dreams jolt the body, a symbol too close to an invisible truth. This is why a single word, gesture, or image can bring tears without context. The mind doesn't remember, but something else does. A recurring symbol isn't persistence, it's invitation. An image isn't decoration, it's a key. And the soul does not need to be taught where the door is. It already knows. The scent of cedar, the image of fire at the edge of water, a voice calling from a hallway with no end. These aren't inventions, they are summons, reminders, codes. The spiral shell curls not outward, but inward toward the chamber of memory, toward the sacred center that has waited without time, not for knowledge to arrive, but for presence to return. And in that return, everything quiets. Not because the answers were found, but because the questions stopped needing to be asked. Like birds crossing thousands of miles to a place they've never seen, yet somehow know. Like the door you always thought was locked, now opening without effort. Warm light spills in, not dramatic, but familiar, like dawn through curtains you've seen in a dream. You've always known. The ache in the chest when hearing a certain note, the way your body leans forward at the right word, the chill on the skin when someone speaks what you were about to say. These are not coincidences. They are memories waking in real time. The intuition that flickers and fades, it's not your imagination, it's your inheritance. What rises in stillness, in symbols, in the whisper between thoughts, that's the language of origin. And it doesn't need to be believed in, it just needs to be listened to. The entire journey, the learning, the seeing, the doubting, the reaching, was never about acquiring anything. It was a shedding, a remembering. The body was always a tuning fork, vibrating with truths older than speech. Your breath, your sleep, your dreams, all part of a system attuned to patterns beyond surface. Observation wasn't passive. It was co-creation. What you looked at looked back. What you held with care began to respond. Dreams didn't speak in riddles. They mapped energy with image. A burning field wasn't just fire. It was a clearing, a symbol of readiness. Misused energy had its warnings. The systems that tried to dominate always cracked. The people who forced the current were always swept by it. And now power is no longer a thing to hold, but a way to be. It doesn't come, it arrives when you do. The final images are soft. A spiral shell on a quiet shore, the shimmer of gold in the last light of evening, and a key, not new, not strange, resting in your open hand. You don't remember finding it, but you know where it fits. The room you step into isn't new. It's the one you left before language, before doubt. It welcomes you without surprise, because the journey was never away. It was only back. Back to resonance, back to rhythm, back to the vessel you've always been.